Within this tutorial, I'd really like to differentiate between what we refer to as field tests, which I'm going to mention to you first, and what we're going to shortly understand by lab tests. Okay, so a field test is likely to be something like a multi-stage MSF test. You know, think about your bleep test, those 20-meter shuttles. I guess you love doing those, right? Now, as an example, a field test, literally done in the field, not in a field, but done in the sports hall or the sports ground, done in the field where we participate, not literally the field, but that's what we call it. That's why we call it field test. So this particular example, it is a prediction of VO2 max. Now focus on that word prediction. That means that this measure is not a measure. It is not specific. And that is where our lab tests come in. And I'd like to draw your attention to the example here. Let's call it a lab test. A lab test. And this lab test here is the example of direct gas analysis. Now, I'm going to go through how this works and what it is that this test ultimately represents. You'll see here, we've got the computer, we've got the mask, we've got connections between the two going through pipes and analyzers, basically. So some critical things that we're interested in here. So first of all, we're saying that we are getting in this person on this treadmill. I mean, by the way, it can be a cycle ergometer. I'll write that down for you in a second. But they're experiencing increasing intensities on this treadmill in this case. So examples are treadmill work. We'll often call these ramp tests, but another example could be we're using a cycle ergometer. Now I won't bore you too much with what a cycle ergometer is, but think about it as an exercise bike with very, very specific resistance that can be set. It's actually literally using weights that are applied to a resistance belt on the flywheel anyway. Whole other conversation, the whole other tutorial. Perhaps you'll do lessons with me on things like Wingate tests and you'll know more about it. But anyway, it's a general picture that works for us here. And what we're asking the performer to do, and this guy in this case, what we're asking him to do is we're asking him to exercise to exhaustion. Exercise to exhaustion. So imagine that this individual, what they are doing here is they're experiencing this ever-increasing intensity on this treadmill, and of course they're exercising until they can't go anymore. So we can of course say that this is maximal, exactly like we could put the word maximal for our field test, the multi-stage fitness test, for example. Now what we're ultimately interested in with this model is the following equation. We are going to take the volume of oxygen taken in, so we're going to measure that through the mask, and from there we're going to take away volume of oxygen out. Now you might be thinking, hang on a second, we don't breathe oxygen out. Well, we do. About 16% of expired air, the breath out, is still oxygen. Okay, it's not the 20+% that we get here, but of course the difference, whatever the difference of those two, is the oxygen that's been consumed by the body. Now of course if we can measure that at the specific moment of exhaustion, for example, we are able to measure directly VO2 max, the volume of oxygen consumed at maximal levels of exercise. And of course that is what we're interested in doing here. So a couple of things. It obviously uses a computer. This is a direct measure. It obviously uses a face mask. I mean, we can see that through the image. Nice and easy for us to represent those ideas. But also, I really want to get this point home, fairly obvious, but I really want to drive this point home. This is a measure, direct measure of oxygen consumption. Now, before the maximal level, we're still measuring oxygen consumption. It's just that it's not the maximum level, right? But here we can measure at submaximal and typically at maximal once the performer reaches that level. And really nice to say about this test is that we believe this test is more valid and it's more reliable than our field test. Let's say our multi-stage fitness test or our Cooper 12-minute run, say, or the Harvard step test. This is a more reliable methodology. But one of the things you might want to be considering is, well, why doesn't everyone do it? Well, of course, it's about practicality. So our red, our negative, is practicality, right? This is expensive. It's one-to-one. It needs specialist equipment. It needs specialist knowledge. This is where this test is not. It is relatively exclusive, and it's one of the reasons why, of course, what we tend to experience in schools and colleges. We tend to experience our field tests, our predictions, our multi-stage fitness tests, for example. But we must be able to recognize that lab test and the mechanisms by which it is a direct measure of, in this case, VO2 max. Thanks.